Hi, I'm Jeff Kenton. I've had a 25 plus year career in post secondary education. More than 20 of those years have been in academia, and 7 of those years were in administration. These stories come to mind in light of recent and related events, and I hope you enjoy them. Yesterday, my department had its spring retreat, which precedes the spring semester and is an opportunity for the department chair to share priorities for the semester and to just make sure that everybody has what they need before the semester starts on Monday. In this case, it's Monday the 31st. During the retreat activities, we had a tour of an augmented reality, virtual reality studio that had been provisioned by the department chair and through request for resources from the powers that be, I guess it's student technology funds. And in the descriptions of the activities that are possible in the AR VR lab, it reminded me of the literature that I studied when I was doing simulation work in the late 1990s. My thesis, in fact, in 1997 was about the use of a simulation to prepare middle school students for learning about electricity. And part of the conversation I had with the student, the graduate assistant who works in there, was that in all this time, the challenge for application of this type of technology, and in my case it was simulations, and in the present case it's the AR VR, is the lack of appropriately designed and prepared curriculum. The having access to simulation technology is great, except there has to be a clear purpose for it, or else the simulation isn't really preparing the students for the things that it's supposed to. So what it led to in my own case was a feeling that even though simulations had a very specific and demonstrable purpose, their application was very narrow because the nature of the phenomenon in each case that's being modeled had an application or return on the time invested of perhaps just understanding a simple relationship between a couple of variables. And that type of trade-off was likely part of the reason why simulations in the 90s didn't catch on as much, was because there weren't developers who were making enough of them to make it worthwhile for the teacher to devote the kind of time and effort it would take to be able to apply the thing in a educationally useful manner. And during the conversation with that graduate assistant, it reminded me of this passage that I've copied from Seymour Papert's book called The Connected Family. Seymour Papert wrote a handful of books that were very formative in my attitude about technology application in educational contexts. The Children's Machine and on the spot, I'm having a hard time remembering the other one. But this one, The Connected Family, after he wrote his 2 more successful general audience books, he wrote more specifically about the role of technology within more specific contexts. Like, a person would learn technology better if their application of technology as a learning tool was in a more general context, i.e., Having technology at home would allow students to become familiar and more adept and so forth. So he wrote books that and founded a foundation aiming at trying to have people using technology in this type of applied and everyday way. And in this book, one that I believe that I was assigned to read when I was in graduate school, Papert talks about this notional time travel experience where a group of time travelers, which includes teachers and surgeons, would show up in a modern day, in a modern day surgical theater and a modern day classroom. And remember, the book was written in 1996, so that's the time frame that we're talking about, and that he was writing in. Okay, so he said that the surgeons would have a really hard time comprehending what's going on because the surgeons were dressed in a particular way, and that they didn't understand the antiseptic antiseptic principles and why certain things were being done a certain way, the nature of the material that is available in the room would be very confusing to those surgeons. But that a group of, he said that, what were they, from the last century, so if we're talking about 1996, the last century would be the 19th century, so 1800s. That these folks would have, the teachers in a modern classroom in 1996 would have relatively less problem. They would see some unfamiliar objects, but that they would understand what was going on and that they, in fact, could take over the class. All right, so one of the things that I brought up in that conversation yesterday was that I don't believe that this metaphor holds up anymore for teachers. A teacher prepared in the 19th century would have a real difficult time being seen as an effective, even as an effective adjunct, substitute, take over in a pinch, because they don't have, you take a look at the nature of many classrooms, especially in light of the recent pandemic. There's been a huge influx of technology resources to enable students to be able to learn at a distance, to learn under these restrictive conditions. And so I think that more like his description of the surgeons, I think that the teachers from the 19th century would see the teachers of the 21st century in a very strange light. That they would not only be interacting with technologies that are able to bring AR and VR, on-demand video, real-time teleconferencing with people who are in, if you have 10 people in the conference, they may be in 10 different physical locations. And I believe that in the same way that the surgeons would be gobsmacked by looking at a 20th century surgical theater, I think that the same way the 19th century teachers would be gobsmacked by a classroom of the 21st century. But in looking at and in fact, this is, in the time of my career, in the time frame of my career, this evolution has happened, and I would even say that primarily within the past 5 years, the insertion, the uptake, the willingness the broad acceptance, the broad expectation to have certain types of technologies in classrooms has really taken hold. And I think that in this case, where we're looking at 26 years ago, that his trope from 1996, I don't think applies anymore. The folks who might be reading this book, the 1996 book, in 2021 or 2022, probably have clear enough recollections of classrooms that had these lo-fi, low-tech applications, and they would probably largely agree with what's in bold here. But I believe, as somebody who's paying attention to what's going on right now, that this trope is probably expired. But despite what was said about Papert, the nature of the application of AR and VR still is going to lag behind expectation because there's not enough development or alignment of activities within a curriculum to make it seem like it's worth the investment for the teachers, the students, the school districts, and so forth. Well, that's all I had to say about this one. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.